armament represents a sixth of the loaded bomber's weight. Remove the guns, gunners and turrets, and all the extra fuel and structure needed to carry them. Build instead an aeroplane just big enough for a crew of 2, and it would certainly be 100 miles an hour faster as a fighter.
The Second World War's most successful multi-role aircraft was so revolutionary it almost didn't get built. The brainchild of Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, the Mosquito was designed as a high-speed unarmed bomber, and unusually it was to be made almost entirely of wood. A wooden plane might not have seemed so advanced in 1939, but de Havilland realised it could be made at every furniture workshop and piano factory in the country by a workforce underused in the war effort. The Air Ministry, however, didn't agree.
The authorities at that time were very much against the idea of changing from metal to wood, and even more against the idea of flying an aeroplane to fight in a war which didn't have its own armament.
But de Havilland continued the development of the Mosquito as a private venture. In 1941, the twin Merlin-engined prototype became the fastest aircraft in the world, reaching a top speed of 433 miles per hour. When the Air Ministry finally realised the potential of the Mosquito, they took great pains to ensure that they didn't give the plane to just anyone.
No one in Bomber Command was allowed to touch the controls of a Mosquito until he'd done 1,000 hours as first pilot and had been selected by somebody or other to fly the things. The great thing about the Mossie was that its limit was how much petrol it could carry. And it could in fact go to any of the major targets in Germany. That's to say right down to Munich or right out to Nuremberg and beyond Berlin. All things being equal, you could expect to get back, unless you were pretty unlucky.
The Mosquito's pace, precise handling and exceptional forward visibility guaranteed success in every task it carried out. But perhaps its most effective role was as a precision bomber. Leading navigator Ted Sismore planned and flew in several daring low-level bombing raids during World War II. In March 1945, he took part in one of the Mosquito's most audacious missions. He was 23 at the time.
The Danish resistance came to us and said, could we attack the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen? The problem was that there were Danes in the attic as prisoners. And when we looked at the building, we said, there's no way we can attack this building and get the people out of the attic. And just before the raid, they actually came to us and said, we've had a message from inside the prison which says, send the RAF. They were being tortured, and they really had come to the end.
This footage, taken on the raid by the RAF film unit, shows the Mosquitoes flying at speeds of up to 300 miles per hour through the streets of Copenhagen on their way to the target.
We went down the quite wide streets there, and we were level with the tops of the buildings, which were, I suppose, 4 or 5 stories high. Surprising how many people from Denmark have told me in the years since how they saw us, where they were when we went by. We ran in all the leading formation below the level of the roof, and the bombs went straight in. Some of the bombs went through the target before they exploded. Critical damage was done to the building, the documentation, and by sheer luck, a number of the prisoners on the roof got out.
But there was tragedy when one of the Mosquitoes lost control and crashed into a school next to the Gestapo building.
The Wing Commander Kleber's wingtip struck a pylon which was holding lights over the railway yards. And this, of course, brought him straight down into the school. Since he was on the bombing run, the bombs were fused, and of course they would have gone up straight away. And it seems likely that in the confusion and the black smoke coming up from the target, which was just short of the real target, that some people behind dropped their bombs into that school. Unfortunately, and greatly regretted, quite a lot of children were killed. But had those bombs gone into the target, it's highly probable that the prisoners in the roof would not have got out. It was a very, very sad ending.
De Despite this tragedy, the Mosquito was certainly the most precise bomber of military targets in the Second World War. The bulk of the devastation, however, was carried out by the heavy bombers of the RAF and United States Air Force. Lincolnshire brothers Fred and Harold Panton have made their fortune chicken farming. Tucked away in another shed, however, a much larger bird takes pride of place. During the war, East Kirkby was one of over 40 Bomber Command air bases in Lincolnshire. The Panton brothers preserved the aerodrome as a home for their prized possession, a 1945 Avro Lancaster.
Well, we did live here as lads during the war, during the blackout, of course, and we can remember the Lancasters taking off and going on bombing raids and going back early mornings, and it was always a strange feeling to me to come out the house when it was pitch black and see the runway with a flare path lit up. That's the relevance of this Lancaster being here today, I suppose.
We feel so proud of those men that in the 50 years ago, what they was doing, because we saw it with our own eyes. And as I keep repeating myself, you cannot speak highly enough of those chaps, because they would have gone of those bombing raids, even if they knew they weren't going to come back.
In fact, half of the young men in Bomber Command didn't come back from operations. Fred and Harold's brother Chris was amongst them.
Sure, if it wasn't for my brother Chris, none of this would have happened today. Well, he got lost on the worst raid during the war, the Nuremberg raid on the 30th and 31st of March 1944, and he's on his last operation. When we look at this aircraft, we think of someone. That's what it's all about.
There are only 2 airworthy Lancasters in the world. The Panton brothers' dream is to one day make it 3. Until then, they can make do with a familiar sound from their childhood, the music of 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. Of the remaining 7,374 Lancasters built, over half were lost in action during the Second World War. On average, a Lanc could only be expected to last 3 weeks.
Our operational career came to a very sudden end on the night of the 5th to 6th of March 1945. We have been briefed to attack the target of Chemnitz in 15 miles from the Czech border, and just going out of a beachy head, the starboard actor started to smoke. They stopped the motor and feathered the propeller, and the pilot asked all of us what we wanted to do, and we all agreed that we would continue. Yeah. There was another factor. A few nights previously, another aircraft had engine problems and had turned back. And in our pilot's mess, apparently, they were veiled hints to the pilot of that aircraft that of cowardice.
Yeah, but they couldn't have said anything about if we had gone back with one engine out. I mean, because we were pressing on and cutting corners and we were falling behind all the time. We got to the target but after everyone else had left. We were sitting ducks for the fighters.
I saw this aircraft approaching, and he let us have it, of course, and it all started to fall to pieces. You remember that moment particularly, don't you?
I remember the shells coming in. I can hear them now banging in, but you never heard anything, did you?
No.
I have heard them on. They all came along the wings and in the centre section. Immediately I knew we were doomed because the wings were burning, you know.
Well, I'm in the turret firing at the fighter, and suddenly it's all over, the turret's burning, and you know that you've got to get out. It's time to save your life if you possibly can.
For the crew of a crippled Lancaster, the chances of bailing out and surviving were much lower than in any other heavy bomber. Its cramped fuselage meant that getting out wasn't easy.
I climbed down out of my turret into the fuselage, took my parachute out of its stowage, put it on, opened the entrance door, pinned it back, and the pilot must have got out of his seat by this time because she rolled over, almost sent me out head first. I must have caught the ripcord on the side of the door or part of the fuselage, and my chute spilled. So I'm standing in the fuselage with the flames coming, fumes and flames everywhere. The ammunition to the rear turret in the ducts going up to the rear turret was going off around my feet. So I thought, no, I've made a mess of this, I'm going to pay for this. I gathered the chute up, rough, yards of parachute silk and cords, held it to my chest, sat on the seat on the entrance door, on the doorstep, threw myself out backwards, and I saw the blazing lamp. I saw the tailplane go over my head, a bit too near for comfort, and the lamp fell away to the left like a burning torch, and that's the last I remember until I'm floating down in perfect silence. So, you know, it was a bit of an airy experience.
We were extremely lucky for all of the crew to survive. We could have suffered terrible death.